All right, what's up, y'all? We're going to be checking out a video by Jordan B. Peterson, and it says, "What predicts academic ability?" And I just found it interesting, so we'll see what he has to say about this.
If you're going to be an entrepreneur, you almost have the opposite profile as a soldier. You're very high in openness and you're lower in conscientiousness, or at least conscientiousness is irrelevant. And the reason for that seems to be that, like, if you're an orderly person and you like to follow procedures and rules, it's kind of hard for you to start a company, because when you first start a company or engage in any other creative process, because entrepreneurs turn out to be the same as artists, you kind of have to, you're not operating within a rule governed structure. In fact, there may be many times where you have to break a small rule to move properly at a higher level of analysis. There's no algorithmic way of generating a new company, right? Obviously. And so it's people who are very high in openness who happen to be good entrepreneurs. And so this is something I thought was extraordinarily cool, because we'd also already known what predicts managerial, administrative, and academic ability. And IQ is crucial for any complex job, so we'll just leave that behind. But what predicts...
Wait, what? Are you telling me you have to be smart to make new things and actually be successful at it? Makes sense. But I definitely agree that just being smart is not enough, sadly.
academic ability, for example, at the University of Toronto, is intelligence, obviously, but also conscientiousness. The correlation between creativity and grades at the U of T is zero. Zero. Right. But it's not surprising. The thing is, you know, it's easy to be cynical about that, but one of the things you have to understand about creative people is that they continually step outside of the domain of evaluation structures, right? Because if you're going to say you're going to evaluate the performance of 100 professors on their lecturing ability, well, you kind of have to measure what's common across all the professors in order to come up with the standards for evaluation. Well, that means you're not going to be able to...
Yeah, dude. This is so true, and it's so frustrating. It's one of my biggest complaints with standardized testing and grading and trying to make metrics for success. A great example of this was when I used to be a server, you know. They would literally grade us based off of the surveys that were done on their little, like, game kiosk payout system, right? And so you were trying to get people to take your survey, which felt so unnatural and so not, you know, humanizing. And so then it would give you a grade on, like, how good of a server you were based on, like, what people put. But it's like, you know, a lot of people didn't want to take the survey. So you had a small portion of the people that you actually served that would actually take the survey and, like, put anything in it. Most people skip it. Then of the people that would, you know, take it, the most likely type of person to take it, right, would be somebody that has a complaint. So that's where they would take it. So they could leave their complaint in the comment section. Whether it had anything to do with you as a server or not, they would leave the complaint in and you would be held, like, accountable for it, right? So all the things that you did that weren't measurable because their questions weren't good enough and all these things were just left out of the picture. You know, all the people that would consistently come back but just were like, I'm not taking a survey. And I would refuse to ask people to take surveys. So some of the servers that were way, they weren't great, were, you know, they would get higher scores than you, and then they would, like, lord it over your head because they had a higher score and, like, say the food was hot or whatever. Even though the majority of the time, how the food is prepared has nothing to do with you as a server, and 90% to do with what your kitchen's doing, and your, like, lead and the quality control person that's, like, making sure the order's done and, like, plated correctly and, like, plattered to where you can take it out to the tables. because servers don't do all that. They have other people that create the food, plate the food, put the food in order, and then say, hey, go run your food to your table. So, there was all these metrics they had that didn't even really involve us. And it was just kind of crazy. So definitely, the more creative you are, or the more you're not willing to step within the bounds of what somebody wants in order to test you, the more insignificant the test can become, where it doesn't really give a good grade. Not saying I was the best server there or the worst one by any stretch of the imagination, but it was always so interesting. And they started like giving servers like preferential hours based on like how well they would do the survey. So some servers would literally, sign the people out and then take the Zeos from them and do the surveys themselves. But there was no way to know when they were doing that or not. So on slow nights, they would take every single survey. So they would like max out their scores. And it was like, dude, it's just being dishonest and not right. And so I wouldn't do that kind of stuff. So my scores were always like, they were okay. But you're always going to have people that dislike you. You're always going to have people that absolutely love you, And I was like, but how many people come back and always want me to serve them because I do such a good job? There was plenty of people that were like that would always come, and I would always serve them, and they would always tip me well. And a lot of them wouldn't take surveys because, they were old people and they were just like, I don't want to do it. They were busy. They were in a hurry that day. They don't have time. I'm not taking a survey that I'm not going to take. So it was kind of crazy. And that is very true with things like this, that creativity is hard to measure. And so it's hard to tell whether somebody will be successful or not, depending on how creative and outside of the normal tendencies that humans follow.
To use that structure to evaluate a particularly creative professor, because he or she is going to do something in a way that's so different that it won't show up on the evaluation measure. And of course, that's what happens in universities. Somebody sent me a couple of days.
My firm belief is that I think one of the biggest places that a university goes wrong in, right, is that they're so based on you succeeding in a system that they don't teach you how to critically succeed outside of a system. So they don't teach you a lot of the extremely valuable things you need to know in order to make these rational, logical, hard decisions about whether a job's the right job for you, what they're asking you to do is right, fair, you feel okay about it, understanding competency and how to, redirect and find a different solution to a problem when a boss gives it to you. Those are things that they don't do a great job of teaching you, because school in general, it wants to have like one or two different answers, or usually one answer, sometimes more. I think the best thing that maybe teaches you a little bit more of the critical thinking side is like, say, engineering, and they're like, make a robot that can do this. And people have creativity to go about that however they want. So you can really see people that are really creative and think outside the box, and they come up with this really good idea that works way better than all these other people that are like, well, I'm just going to do it this way. So, but a lot of classes, there's no way to really measure that and to see that. So you lose out on a significant portion of people that just don't fall within the sides and bounds that like higher education wants you to do. And so it's not necessarily that somebody that's people willing to sit in the system and become higher educated. It does not mean that they're actually any smarter, more capable of doing a certain job than, say, someone who focuses on other things, or just learns a lot about economics on their own, or learns and reads a lot. There's so much more that's going to teach you how to be intelligent and good at your job than education. And a lot of my friends that have always been extremely successful at their workplaces, many of them aren't even higher educated. they're just smart and they understand how to handle people. They have all the, I call them soft skills. I'm sure there's an actual terminology for them, but like how to speak to somebody, how to handle difficult situations, how to properly organize like tasks and get them done in a certain way because these are the ones that matter the most, etc. A lot of that is very hard to teach somebody just because they went to school. It's about whether they get the larger concept or not. And school doesn't really play a huge part in whether somebody's going to be that way or not. You know, I know a lot of people that have gone to school and left school really are the same level of intelligence that they were when they started school. And I know some people that were really intelligent and went to school and succeeded and did all these great things with that intelligence, but I feel like they would have been successful regardless because they just had that way of thinking, that it factor that helped them get to that next level. And then higher education was just a little thing that they added as a stepping stone to fill in information that they needed to. But nowadays, with technology being as widespread as it is, and information being so widespread, a lot of stuff you can learn on your own. You know, it's actually crazy. You can get on YouTube, get on Google, buy books, buy self-help books. You can learn so much on your own without ever even needing to go to school. It's a bit about just having the right attitude.
Days ago, somebody sent me an essay that they had written for their master's thesis that was wildly creative, and they were basically told to leave the program and that they couldn't continue. Not in a mean way. What happened was that what they were thinking was so outside of the conventions in the discipline is that no one had any idea what to do with the essay. So and that's really the lot of creative people, right? They're always stepping outside of evaluation structures. And so it's not that surprising that the relationship between creativity and grades at the U of T is zero. We found out as well by looking at graduate student performance across multiple institutions that there was a negative correlation between creativity and graduate school performance. It wasn't even zero, it was worse than negative. Being creative was negative. And you think, well, that could make you cynical as well, but you can't be cynical in that way, because one of the things that happens in science is that science tends to progress incrementally rather than in great leaps. Now and then someone comes along who blows the structure out of a science and advances it ridiculously, like Einstein. But like, most people aren't Einstein, and maybe thank God for that. Most of the time, you're in a discipline, you understand the discipline, and then once you've developed understanding of the discipline, you know what the next micro question is that should be answered. And part of the reason that science is so powerful is because it allows people who aren't genius level creatives to make real advances in the generation of knowledge, one tiny micro step at a time. It doesn't matter if there's 100,000 people doing it and each of them is making a micro step, man. We're zipping along as fast as we possibly want to zip along. And so it turns out to be conscientiousness that's the excellent predictor of graduate students.
Yeah, so I think there's definitely that too, is it's like there aren't that many people that are going to just blow you out of the water with their intelligence or anything along those lines, their athleticism, whatever. But it's like the people that you know, slowly answer the questions and progress it to a certain point, and then somebody has this like crazy idea. You need both types. So it's not necessarily that it's like bad to not be creative. You just kind of have to understand who you are and where you stand and fall within the systems when it makes sense, and go outside of them when it doesn't. I know a lot of people that are very rigid in what they do and how they do things, and they're so different than how I am. But they're also really successful because they have that way of being, that rigidity, that consistency, you know. And a lot of times, if you're a creative person, you're probably not going to be as consistent. And it's going to hurt you in job fields, etc., because people want consistency. They want people that can be more like a robot and always come about the problem the same way, and etc. So it's like there's a lot more that goes into it than just necessarily creativity, for sure. And I think sometimes creativity will hamper you being successful. It just will.
Student performance. That's the best predictor for law. It's the best predictor for managerial positions. It's the best predictor for administrative positions. Anything that has a structure of rules that needs to be applied, conscientiousness is a great predictor. So, but it's not good for predicting artistic ability or entrepreneurial ability. And that's also really important, because one of the things, this is partly why bureaucracies stultify, right? Because what happens is as they develop, they get chock full of conscientious people, with a few psychopaths thrown in there just for good measure. They get chock full of conscientious people busily zooming efficiently down a single track.
And also, just in case you don't know what he's talking about when he's talking about conscientious, and like, what does that mean? The definition is the quality of wishing to do one's work or duty well and thoroughly. So conscientious people, they want to do their job well and correctly. And so that does not necessarily correlate to intelligence, creativity, etc. Some people are more conscientious than others, but it is a predictor of you traveling farther into like a hierarchy system or up into upper level management, because it's about how well you do your job. So the more you care about doing a great job at your job and doing good work, even when nobody's watching you, etc., I mean, that's the biggest predictor of whether you're going to be a good manager, etc. You know, like with management, it's handling people. And that can be a very difficult thing. And I think a lot of people that are conscientious are not necessarily good people. Like they're not good with people. That was a kind of weird way I said that, but they're not so great with people, and they have to learn how to be good with people. And that is a skill that is not taught in a classroom. It is learned by dealing with people and thinking critically through the experience and asking lots of questions a lot. And the higher you get up, the more you'll notice that your bosses are not conscientious to how people feel below them. So it is interesting. They're not paying attention to how people feel. They're just paying attention. Are you doing your job to the greatest ability that you can? And that's why they can appear very heartless, because they stop thinking about people on like an emotional, like happiness level. And they're just thinking about like, how efficient are you being at your job? And that can be brutal. And a lot of people don't like living in a system like that. But that's one main thing that will make you highly successful, is if you care about your job and doing the best job you can. But it also can become extremely frustrating when you're dealing with people that don't want to do their jobs, or bosses that don't care about doing the right thing, etc. So it's a harsh thing to live with.
And then all of a sudden the landscape shifts, and they're going very, very efficiently in exactly the wrong direction, and then the whole bloody thing falls apart. So you need to have some creative wing.
I think that is one of those things that makes a company fail. The last company I worked for is like a prime example of this, where everybody in their organization was so efficient and all about, you know, like working harder, working faster, zoom, get as much done as you can every day. You've got to work harder. You've got to get your people to work harder. That, you know, when like COVID hit, and it was like all of a sudden we didn't have enough people didn't want to come to work, their whole system kind of like crumbled and just like shattered. And nobody up at the top could come up with any like creative solution to fix what was going down at the bottom and making their stores fail and be messy and falling apart and people quitting left and right. And they had like no idea. They could not come up with a concept of like, what do we need to do to promote people to come back to our job? What do we need to do to get people to stay once they're hired? what do we need to do to like make the work-life balance of our managers and stuff better to where they stop quitting at this like crazy atrocious rate? And after 2 years of going through that, when I left, I finally dipped. I just said, I can't do this anymore. It's not healthy. And it's not going to better me or my career or my family or friends by doing this. I have to walk away. I have to find something else. That at least maybe I have a chance to where it's not like this. And they had still not come up with an answer. Their answer was just work harder, work harder, work harder, work harder. And you need people that are creative and can convince these people up there that we understand that we need to hold people accountable and have them work at a certain level and get things done and not just be lazy and not do anything at work. But you also have to come up with compromises and find ways to make people want to come to work and work harder. And when you don't have those incentives in place anymore, you turn your company against you and it falls apart in front of your eyes. And it's really interesting. So, and maybe they'll make it. They haven't gone out of business yet. I mean, it's $1 billion company, so it would take a lot for them to fail, but they lost a lot of like good leadership, GMs, general managers, co-managers, that had been with the company for years. And then all of a sudden it went from being like this company that was like, we treat you like family, we care about you, to you're not working hard enough. Why can't you get the job done? Why does the store always look crappy? Whatever. And it was because it's like they were so conscientious about doing their jobs and making sure it's done well and everything's perfect, which is a good thing, by the way. But they're so rigid in that belief that they couldn't come up with a way to like solve the problem that people didn't want to do the job with what they were currently giving them. And by asking them to do more, you were just stressing your employees out more and more to where eventually they experience burnout and just quit. Pretty interesting.
In your organization to come up with completely absurd ideas that might just on the off chance be true.
Yep.
And so creativity is strange in that manner too, because it's a high risk, high return game. You're a lot safer in your life to find a functioning entity and to operate as a cog within it, as long as the entity keeps functioning. Because if you're creative and you go off on tangents all the time, there's some probability that one of those tangents is going to be exactly what is needed at the time, and you're going to become hyper successful as a consequence. But there's much more probability that even though some of your ideas might be highly valuable, the probability that this is the right time and place for them is extraordinarily low.
Yeah. And I totally agree with that, where you can have a great idea and it's just not the right time to implement it. And then it's also sometimes extremely hard to get heard, especially if you're younger, especially if you're just starting out, etc. I had me and people I worked with, we had some great ideas to how to fix this problem of like people not wanting to work there and how to like make the work environment better. And they just refused to listen to us, or they would say, oh, we listened, but then nothing would change. And it was like, you've got to listen to these people that are down at the ground level sometimes, but you also can't listen to everything they say. And it takes a good leader and a good boss to sift through the BS and understand when they're really saying, hey, this is the truth. This is what needs to happen. And when it's like, they're just pulling your leg and they want more help because they don't want to, work hard enough, etc. Like there's a fine balance between being a lazy worker and being a hard worker, and somewhere in between is what you kind of want your workers to be at. You can have extremely hard workers, but a lot of people like that will eventually burn out or leave the company. You have to find people that are in between that want to do their jobs, will show up and be reliable, but also are not trying to be hyper successful. Because in general, hyper successful people will not stay, like he's saying, and be safe and comfortable in the same environment. They're gonna look outside of that job and try and find a better job, a better opportunity, another way to climb. They're not going to passively stay in a company because it creates a safe space for them and allows them to, make that $80,000 every year for 20 years. They're going to keep going. So you need different types of people to help you run a business. You need all of them. And sometimes even lazy people can help you, because they'll come in and they'll be lazy and it'll show all the other people at your job like, man, I don't like this person. They suck. And it might even reflect back on them and realize, man, there are some of the things that this person does that I really don't like. But then I remember this one time 4 weeks ago when I actually did the same thing. Oh, maybe I shouldn't do that. I really hated what this guy did today. So they'll even teach you things, and they'll teach your workforce things. So it's not necessarily always a bad thing. I mean, I don't think you're going to be successful if you're a lazy person, but, there's levels to everything, and people are only going to be able to travel so far up before they hit their plateau. And then after that, they might never go farther than that. And so they're happy staying at that plateau, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to continue to do great work as the years go by too, because complacency can set in.
So to produce a successful creative product, for example, in the marketplace, you need a ridiculous combination of creativity so that you keep generating ideas, and then a network around you of people who have skills that you don't, and then the production of a product, let's say, whatever that happens to be, that's actually in demand by the marketplace at exactly that moment, and that someone else hasn't already done better. So the sensible thing to tell anybody who wants to be creative is, that's stupid.
Yep.
You shouldn't do it. It's your probability of success is so low that it's better just to do something sensible. But the problem with that is that creative people can't do that because they're creative. And if they shut down their creativity, it's like an extrovert who's gone to live in in an isolated cell. A creative person who isn't being creative, they just wither and die. So they're stuck with it. But it is a high risk, high return strategy.
Interesting. That's where it ended. I definitely agree with that, though. There has to be a fine line where you're willing to be creative, but you're also have to be reasonable and say, and that's why creatives have such a hard time in the workforce, especially in America, because you're not really incentivized to be creative. They want you to be a cog in the machine that does what they ask you to do, is on time, is responsible, gets the job done efficiently and well, and that's what matters to them. And so it's always going to be rough when you're a creative person, because you're going to be caught in this side where you want to do good at your job, but it also makes you unhappy to work at a job that requires you to be this structure oriented and everything, right? And I think sometimes too, it's like, some of them can adapt and find things that outside of work allows them to be extremely creative. And so when they're at work, they can keep their creativity in check, at least to where they're reasonable about it. And then other times, there's people that just can't do that. And they're those free spirits, the people that you're like, I can't believe they look that way or do this and that. But those people are just as needed in society as people that are structure oriented and follow rigidity and do their duty and everything. You need both of them. They provide different things to the table. So there's always this fine line between the two of them. But I really liked this, so I wanted to talk about it. This guy is pretty smart. There's a lot of stuff that I like what he says or would like to add to. And I appreciate you guys listening. So peace out. Till next time.